That's the short version. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Highlights. You guys, you heard that intro. We have with us the one, the only Ann Handley. Ann, how is it going?
How are you, Erin? It's so good to see your face.
Oh my gosh. So before we dive into the content, and you guys heard a little preview, so you know it's going to be fire before we dive in. Ann jumped on the call and I'm like, how are you, Ann? She's like, well, just did some snowshoeing, which I haven't heard ever in my life. I heard it twice this week, you and LGO. I'm like, what's up with the Bostonians and the snowshoeing? Can we talk about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, so we have 2 feet. I'm in Boston, just outside of Boston, not too far from LGO. We have 2 feet of snow on the ground, and I am speaking to you now from my tiny house, which is my tiny house office, which is behind my actual house that I live in. And so it was snowed in for days. I think we got a big snowstorm over the weekend. And I thought, well, I don't need to worry about that till April. But then I realized, oh God, I'm talking to Erin. And so I wanted to be able to speak from here because it's the best internet connection. And anyway, whole thing. So I was like, oh, so put on my boots, put on my snowshoes, and it's like, trudge out to the tiny house. And like Erin and I were joking, and it's like, oh, that sounds so quaint, doesn't it? It's like, oh, snowshoes, tiny house. Like, what part of that story isn't like completely awesome? Well, I'll tell you, it was like I was like I was so angry. I was like irrationally angry heading out here. And it sounds picturesque, it sounds quaint, it sounds like a storybook. It is like, no, it was cold. I was just really regretting I had to come out here and dig out the front walk just to like get into the man. It was like rough. Pull out my shoulder. Now I have to go to physical therapy. Now I'm just piling on. But
well,
that's how it was.
You guys, everyone send Ann the grateful vibes for what she has gone through just to be with us here on StreamYard. Everyone send her the thank you vibes. Oh my gosh. Well, Ann, I mean, that's intense, man. I thank you so much. I'm even more honored than I was before. So I just want to give like a quick tiny bit of context besides the introduction. You guys heard the backstory with Ann and my like long-term super kind of creepy obsession and our dog love, mutual love of our dogs. But why I'm so pumped for you to be here today with my highlighters is because we talk kind of all the time about the pain of being writers. And your book, it came out in 2014. It is more relevant in 2021 than ever. And I know you're kicking around a second edition to update some of the examples. And the principles and the strategies are classic evergreen. I mean, you're essentially Walden Ponding, Thoreauing Emerson at your frozen pond with the tiny house and the stomping and the transcendentalism. Like I'm tracking with you. I see you, and it's freaking working. So in your book, you talk about the fact that we have become what you say is a planet of publishers. And this was 2014. So this planet has grown a scotch in the last 7 years, and we are still a planet of publishers. And now with phones, everyone with a microphone and a camera in their hands is running their own publishing conglomerate for good, bad, worse, evil, boring, disgusting, annoying, etc. So for my highlighters that are sitting here saying, it's so loud out there. Yes, you have a unique perspective to share. We want to hear your voice. But for those of my listeners who don't think that they're writers, who don't think of themselves as writers, what would you say to them? I mean, how should they be shifting their mindset, first of all, to even think that they're capable of elevating who they are as they show up when they're typing?
Yeah, great question. So I think, and I think the answer is embedded in the setup to the question, right? Which is that we are awash in content, and we are in a world where we are all on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or anything, Clubhouse more recently, right? It's all content, and most of us have websites. That means you are a publisher, and so we are all showing up online, and that means we're all publishers, and very often that means we are all writers. And that's true even if the content that we're creating is like this, like a conversation between Erin and me, because this conversation is going to be packaged and repackaged probably and put on a landing page and put on LinkedIn and put on Facebook and atomized all across the web, which means that she is her own little publishing empire right there sitting there interviewing me. And so all that to say that I think it's a little silly that so many of us feel allergic to writing, right? Because it's the backbone of what we are doing as businesses, as marketers, when we're talking about ourselves and when we're connecting with customers or prospects on the internet. And so, I don't mean to say silly. That sounds a little bit dismissive. I get it, because there is this feeling that, well, I'm not a writer, but I'm here to tell you, like, you are a writer. And if you are online, you are a writer. And I wrote my book, Everybody Writes, to empower people like you and like me, like all of us, to reframe that conversation about who is a writer and who isn't, because we are all writers, and if we are doing business online, we are publishing.
Mm-hmm. And so the line you use in your book, to just kind of restate what you just said, is, you said those who think they can write and those who
Yeah.
think that they can't. There are those who think they can write and those who think that they can't. And oftentimes they are both wrong, which I thought was very funny, because, being a writer is not like being a singer. Like, there are some people who are not singers. I'm just going to throw that out there, right? I mean, but you're saying if you have a keyboard, if you have a story, you essentially can get better at this. Like, and you open your book by talking about doing that one push-up, which I thought was so funny, because, I see you as this like athlete. You're always doing your runs and, you're doing your walks. And I'm like, she can only do one push-up, like, guaranteed she can do more. And then I kept reading it. It's like, no, you do a lot of push-ups. But you were saying, like, exercising that muscle was so important into getting into the shape of being a writer. So how do we, I guess step one would be like, if we hate writing, okay, let's say we're like, okay, I can become a writer. I can put in some reps and get better. How do we overcome the feeling of like, what the F do I even say? Because I don't like this.
I don't like this. Yeah. So I think the first thing is to reframe what we're doing, that, we are writing. Like we talked about that. Like we're all writers. And I think the notion of, when we say that we hate writing, well, what is it that we hate doing exactly? Like, when people say that they hate writing or that they are not good writers, very often they're talking about grammar. They're saying, oh, because I have some trauma from high school or from college where some, teacher or person in an authority position that was higher than mine, had the power to give me an F on a paper, told me that I was a terrible writer. Like, typically there's some trauma in the background that precipitates that mindset that you have about yourself, or sometimes it's just internalized too, that you feel that you're not good at writing because you're not good at grammar. And I think those two things are completely different. Like, you just need to let go of that. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, good writing is not about good grammar. Good writing is about connecting with the people that you want to connect with the most. And so when you say you hate writing, I think, just like shift your mindset a little bit and say, what is it that I actually hate? Do I hate the fact that I don't write in a certain way? Maybe I'm holding on to the idea that I talk about in the book of like the 5-paragraph essay from high school, where you had to write according to a certain template, and you had this rubric and you had to fill that out. Like, forget about that. Like, writing should be fun. Writing is just you speaking your heart on a page. And so I think there's a couple of different tricks that you can, to help yourself out of that funk. One of the favorite things that I do is just sort of free form, right? Every morning I wake up, and before I open up Twitter, or lately it's been before I open up Clubhouse, I open up my journal and I take a Sharpie, my writing implement of choice, and I just write longhand. There's a notion of doing like morning pages. I don't do anything like that, because that's like, do 3 pages every morning. That's one way of doing it. But for me, it's just like whatever comes to mind. Usually it's stories from the day before. It's weird things that happened. It's observations. It's, maybe what my little dog has done that morning. It could be anything. But the point of doing it is just to give myself that practice. It's doing the push-up in a written, through writing. But the other way, so that's one way to do it, is just to sort of build a practice and tune your brain to, that's legit, that's writing. Now, if I were to just if I had that journal here with me and I were to open it up and start reading it, you would be like, oh my God, she is literally the worst writer. Like, Erin, why do you have her on? Because she's terrible. Because I let go of that self-judgment, right? That journal is just for me. I don't publish it. I don't plan to publish it. It's a place where I collect ideas, where I can exercise the muscle, and that's it. Like, that's the purpose. Sometimes I will pull ideas out of that, and they will become part of my newsletter. They might become a snippet in a book someday. Like, sometimes that will be my like that's almost my garden for ideas, that
Yeah.
notebook, but I don't think about publishing it. So that's the first thing. Second thing you can do is just, like, writing doesn't mean that you have to literally sit down and write. Like you can dictate a blog post, you can dictate a paragraph that you're going to put on social media. There's just a million ways. I think that you just need to pull it out of you, find the way that's most comfortable for you.
I love the last piece of advice. A big part that I'm preaching in my keynotes, I'm always saying we don't type like we talk. And we don't type like we
Yeah.
talk. And so I think honing
Yeah.
in on like which way, like for me, this is, I mean, you and I are speakers. I am more comfortable, former English major. I'm more comfortable writing than speaking. When I read my writing, I'm like, that was good. When I watch my videos, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like that is a more comfortable medium for me, is pen to paper. And I think what you're saying is like kind of hone in, like which way are you most comfortable? Mining those nuggets out of your heart and soul in a way that you think the world's going to be most receptive to be able to digest them. So maybe it is dictation, maybe it is writing. I'm a huge Julia Cameron Morning Pages fan. I'll never forget when I got super into it, I started reading them. The big mistake, like you said, not to do. And I think it was our friend, I think Amy Landino, who is awesome. She's a YouTuber, a mutual friend of ours. And she was like, you read your morning pages? Like, are you a psychopath? She's like, you don't read them. You never read them. You don't have to, or if you read them, don't judge it. No one's going to see it. And once I kind of was able to release that feeling of writing for an audience versus writing for writing's sake, I think it was a big shift. Anyway, so I love that what you said.
Yeah. No, I love what you just said. Just to build on what you just said, like you said something really important there, which is that when you think about writing, don't think about writing for an audience first. Like the most important thing is just to write, like just to give yourself permission. Like I call it the ugly first draft in Everybody Writes. Other people call it like shitty first draft. I mean, isn't, whatever, insert the adjective of your choice. But the idea that you sort of stop judging yourself. And that's when people say that they hate writing. A lot of times it's because like they stop themselves before they sit down. I talk in the book about how, people will say like, oh, I have writer's block. I don't know what to say. But, you don't get talker's block, right? A plumber doesn't get pipe block, it's essentially just the tools. And so however you communicate, like just adopt that same mindset when you sit down to write. And if you want to dictate, whatever the case may be, there's lots of good tools that can help pull that out of you. If you decide you want to dictate, there's lots of ways that you can ultimately help that become part of, on a page, a written form. But lose the judgment, like just stop judging yourself before you even start. And that's where I think where people get tripped up sometimes,
Totally. And that judgment is really rooted in what you said in your book. You have a whole paragraph about fear, and that like the joy of writing that you obviously have when you guys can hear in her voice that she loves what she does. I mean, you love what you do. You're talking about your writing like it's a dear friend that you just want to like snuggle up with a cup of cocoa and a warm fire. Like the warmth you have for your relationship with writing comes through in this podcast. And whereas other people talk about showing up online and you can just hear the frustration, it's like a bad relationship. They just want to get out of it. And so, and so I think what's cool is like, if we can figure out how to identify if we're afraid of it, are we afraid of that we post something on social media and God forbid it doesn't get X amount of likes or comments. And then what happens? Well, 70% of us pull it down because we're so afraid of not getting that stamp of approval from the world to validate that what we created was good or not. And so what I love about your book is you give so many great tips about how to overcome that fear and step into your own voice. And I'm going to recommend your newsletter at the end and link to it in the show notes, but it is the only newsletter that I read every week, just like Neen James, mutual friend, also a super fan. Yours, Tamsin Webster's, and Mark Manson's are my favorite newsletters. Those are the only three I read every week and never skip. And the reason for that, with your newsletter particularly, is that you courageously, after all the reps, I mean, if your writing were like biceps and triceps, it would be like #goals, right? Because they're shredded. You know what I'm saying? But your newsletter, it sounds like the person that we're hearing on this podcast. Like when you guys subscribe to Total Anarchy, you hear someone's voice. And also what I love about your newsletter is it's not contenting for content's sake, where you're putting it out every week. I mean, tell us about your position on quality over quantity, because you obviously walk that walk.
Yeah. So my newsletter comes out every other Sunday. It's every fortnight if you're listening to this from the UK. I think that's the only place that they really use that word. And maybe Australia too. I'm not sure. I should ask Neen. But anyway, yes, it comes out every other Sunday. And I just want to go back to one thing that you said a minute ago too, before we talk about quality versus quantity. But you talked about how, when you read my book, when you read my newsletter, how you can hear my voice. That is because you're probably reading the fourth or fifth draft of whatever it is that I'm written. So all that to say, my voice does not come out on the first draft, and I wouldn't expect that anything that you write, anybody listening here today, is that would be true of you too, because that ugly first draft is going to feel like I always make it, or I always draw the analogy that when you read my first drafts, it sounds like I was typing with mittens on. It doesn't sound like me. It sounds like it could be like any third grader, that you pulled out of your local elementary school and just sat down with, a typewriter, or maybe like a chimpanzee. Like it's almost incoherent, because I'm just trying to. It is. No, I'm legit. I'm just trying to get ideas out, because that to me is. The first draft is the most painful part of writing. That's the part that I would say that I don't hate it, because I see it now as a necessary part of the process. And so I sort of have a healthy respect for it, but it's the part that I don't like the most. And so my solution for that is I rush through it as fast as I can, because I really do like the polishing, the honing, the getting to my voice, and like really thinking about how would I really say this? What is it about me that I can put into my writing that makes it sound like me, so that if you were to cover up the logo on my newsletter, does it sound like me, or does it sound like Erin, or Neen or Tamsin, so I want to make sure that it sounds like me. And that's a really important step in the process. But to even get to that point where you're infusing anything you do with voice, you've got to start with like that monkey draft, right? And so that's why I rush through it. It's terrible. It's not full sentences, but that's okay, because once I have that raw clay on the page, then I can shape it and start to play with it and craft it and insert my voice. And that's, for me, that's the part I love. So when you say that I love writing, that's the part that I absolutely like. I revel in that. I just think it's so fun. When people say to me, like, how long does it take you to do your newsletter? And I say 8 hours. And they're like, 8 hours? That's crazy. And it's like, yeah, but the part that I hate, it's like I rush through that. That's like 40 minutes. The rest of it is just like me tweaking and tinkering. I'm like a mechanic that loves old engines. It's like you just want to hear it hum. You just really want to. And that's how I feel about writing. And I think anybody can do that. Like, you just got to figure out what's the part you hate the most, rush through that, and spend a lot of time on other things. Like, pull pieces out that you really love.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, if you think about building a house, like it's this framework, and it's like the construction and the lumber and the hammering and all the like part. And then the part that's fun is like the throw pillows and the Pinterest paint colors and the decorating. And so maybe I think what if I was listening, and what I would take away from what you just said is like, if you hate writing, maybe it's because you haven't gotten past like the boring, hard construction manual labor part, and you haven't allowed yourself to decorate, So I love that so much. For our listeners, we talk a lot about my highlight is a lot about storytelling. Like, that is the big thing with a lot of the network marketers, the entrepreneurs, the small business owners. We're constantly, how do we share our story? And, in the digital marketing world, storytelling has been a buzzword that's come and gone. But in the network marketing world, that is very much still at the core of how they are trained to show up to their tribe to explain products and services. So what I love about your book is you had this great line. You say, what matters isn't storytelling. It's telling a true story well.
Yeah.
What matters isn't storytelling. It's telling a true story well. Can you help us unpack that a little bit? Because that's really profound.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So I think the idea of storytelling, like, people, especially in business, entrepreneurs, small business, like, it doesn't matter really. It's also, it's true all the way up to Cisco. They hear that word storytelling and they think that it's about fairy tales and spinning narratives. And so I think that when you flip it around and you think about, it's not about storytelling, it's about telling stories well. That to me makes a massive difference in how you think about this idea of storytelling, or telling a narrative, spinning a narrative, shaping your brand in a way that is human-sized and accessible to your audience that you're trying to connect with. That's all storytelling is, essentially. It's packaging from a business standpoint. It's packaging who you are and what you do in a way that's relevant for the audience. It's telling a story about that. It's showing how your products and your services live in the world. It's showing what you do, not what you do just in general, but what you do for others. It's putting everything in context that makes sense to the people you connect with and that inspires them in some way, or that feels relevant to them. And so when I talk about telling a true story well, it's about, number one, true, right? It's got to be true, because story can not be true sometimes, just in general. So make sure it's true. And then the second thing, is just telling it well. Could it only come from you? I talked a minute ago just about, like, if you were to cover up the logo on your website, when you read the copy on there, when you read your content, when you look at your email newsletter, when you look at your social posts, like, does it sound like it could only come from you? And part of that is going to be your products and services, but it's not just that, right? It's also how you deliver them. It's how you are as a person, what your customers can expect from you. Like, I think all of that is layered on to the words that you use and the story that you tell more broadly.
That's a tough test. I was just thinking about my content and I'm like, I wonder if someone read my stuff, like, would they know it was just me? And the
Yeah.
key to that, and that's I think I encourage all of us to go away from this podcast, myself
Yeah,
included.
it's a
It's a good
super
test.
powerful tactic. Yeah, exactly. And this is true, is if you if you have clients or no matter who it is that you're talking to, look at your own business and just go through that exercise. It's very powerful because it makes you see, I don't know if that's actually true or not, is it? So I think it's a good test of how well you're telling your story online and how true that story is to you and to the audience.
Yeah. Oh, and that's so good. And how unique, right? Because
Yeah.
for you're like
Yeah.
saying it can only come from you. So that means that whatever makes you weird and quirky, and
Yeah.
maybe the things like you were saying, like trauma as a kid, like what made you a weirdo to a
Yeah.
teacher, or
Yeah.
you didn't fit in with the cool girls table, or you didn't, whatever your jam was, that's probably the nugget that you want to double down on and infuse into your copy so that people do recognize Ann and not Aaron or
Yeah.
Neen,
Right.
or right. I mean, so that's kind of part of, I
Yeah,
think, full
exactly.
circle, like the fear we're talking about, and embracing that. Do you have the balls to show up as who you really are to the world, through how you're communicating? And that's easier
Yeah.
said than done.
Yeah, it is, but it's not, because, like, think about, like, when we talk about voice, we talk about, like, tone of voice, and sometimes when we talk about writing, like, it sounds so high-minded, like it sounds like it's up here, like it's something very, like, esoteric, and it's like, oh yes, I love his voice. It's not about that. It's really about your style, your personal style, and I take it right down to, like, the words you use, the phrases you use. Our friend Neen, for example, she sprinkles in a little Aussieisms, now and again, right? She calls people, she's like, good day, gorgeous, in the opening to her email. Like, that would only come from Neen, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
she is who she is. And so I hear her voice when I read her newsletter. And so, challenge yourself with your own business. Again, your social posts, anything that is customer facing, look at what they see when they come to your website. If you were to, like, strip away the color, strip away your incredible logo, all that money that you spent to create this website or these experiences online for your customers, and focus on the words, and just make sure, not that you are sounding not like you, but that you are sounding like you at your very core, and can you actually, like, use that space in a way to connect with customers? Like, the words matter. The words matter a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so good, Ann. It's so good. And I know that there are a lot of our listeners that are trained in a certain way of writing, and they're given examples,
Yeah.
right? They're given templates, they're given fill in the blank, and what happens is that through some of, like, network marketing, for example, there tends to be a parroting from the top down, because you're like, well, that worked for Ann. Would that work for me to have a
Mhm.
total anarchy, even though my name's Aaron? Like, no, because it would be total anarchy, which isn't even a word. Doesn't make sense. Like, so, like, so, like, embracing that, I think, is the big call to action that
Yeah.
you're challenging people with. And so I think for like an action step, let's say we have someone listening that's like, okay, I'm feeling pumped. I want to share my authentic story. I want to start to embrace being a writer and not be so afraid of it. I want to start exercising the muscle. What's one thing that they could try from, let's say, their Instagram post this afternoon that maybe might make them feel a little bit closer to elevating their writing style?
Yeah, that's a good challenge. I like that. I was gonna say start with your About Us page because I think that's a space that most people just don't spend enough
Mm-hmm.
time, on. But all right, Instagram. Let's see. Instagram's my favorite social platform. So this is a good one. I I think the best thing you can do there is not to just describe what's going on in the photo, which I see a lot on Instagram. And you actually do this super well, Erin, because you and I follow each other on Instagram, and I like the way that you layer in a little bit of color, you show what's going on in your head. So I think an easy way to do that on Instagram is to use more than two senses, right? Because on Instagram it's a visual platform, right? And so your tendency is just to describe what's going on. Like if I were to post a photo of my dog, for example, I'll be like, oh, somebody's tired today because it's a picture of him sleeping on his bed, right? So what if I added a second sense to that, right? And by that I mean, sight, hearing, smell, anything that would involve another sense other than just your eyes. So add another one in, just talk about how, think about how he's feeling, think about what might be going on in his head. So add a second sense. Maybe add a sense of like smell or think about, is his body exhausted? Why is he exhausted? So just layer on another, a second sense to that. Just always include two in every Instagram post. And I think that's a great way to do it. The second thing that I do, and I do this a lot on Instagram, is I take something to its ridiculous conclusion, right? And so, actually, I did this in my newsletter this week. So, quick story: I went to see an orthopedic surgeon about a shoulder injury that I got when I fell on the slush, not from snowshoeing to my tiny house, by the way, but happened last winter on the streets in Boston, because I was just wearing the wrong shoes when I went out in the morning to get
Oh,
coffee. So yeah, it was just
bummer.
disastrous. But anyway, broke my fall with my shoulder. My arm tried its best to help me out, and it failed miserably. So something went awry in here. So I show up at the orthopedic surgeon, and I'm walking into the building, and I notice that orthopedic is spelled, rather than spelled the traditional American way, which is ortho, PEDIC, right? Orthopedic.
Mm-hmm.
It's spelled PAEDIC, orthopedic, I guess,
Hmm.
which is the way that they spell it in the UK. And it's actually the way that the National Association of Orthopedic Surgeons spells it as well. I found out later.
Fun
But all
fact.
that to say, yeah, I walked in, I was like, that's a curious spelling, because it was a completely nondescript building. It was like a very pedestrian kind of box of a building beside a highway. There's nothing special about it at all. But because I'm such a word nerd, and I loved the fact that there was an AE buried in there. And I thought about that, and I took it to its ridiculous conclusion. I thought, what if I walk in there and it's like I'm stepping back in time? What if it's like jolly old England? And what if I walk in and everyone looks like I'm suddenly on the set of the Bridgertons? What would happen then? And
Yes, please.
yeah, I know, right? And is the doctor going to come in looking like Anthony Bridgerton? And is he going to have a top hat like, good day, ma'am? How might I help you? And I would be like, yes, my shoulder has been vexing me for the past, and so it was like a whole story that I told in my head. So the reason why I'm sharing that is because I took it to its ridiculous conclusion, right? It's so maybe my dog on the bed, maybe he keeps changing positions, and maybe he's doing doing quarantine yoga, they're lying on his little puppy mat. So think about what you can do to add layer on a little humor and an element of just bringing something to its ridiculous conclusion. At the very least, you'll loosen up your writing voice, and maybe you can use it, maybe you can't, but I think it's a fun way to approach something like Instagram.
And so much gold in that. I mean, that, first of all, it's hilarious on so many levels. The two senses per post is really, that's a gold nugget. We just need to put a highlight on that. And I mean, it really is. It's so funny because what you're talking about is essentially, it's like neuroplasticity, right? It's like creating new pathways in your brain to allow you to access it faster. And one of your newsletters, and I use this all the time, this exercise you're talking about, in one of your newsletters, you went deep and narrow on this practice.
Yeah.
And you said, keep asking yourself, and then what happened? And then what happened? And then what? And then what?
Yeah.
And I read that, and I swear I did it so many times when I was writing my book, and it really does. It just, like you said, just helps your brain get into that creative mode, and it sort of forces you to switch into it even if you're not just like naturally feeling it one day. It kind of was like a warm up before a workout. Like, it's like, come on, let's go. We're doing this. Get warmed up. Let's do this.
Exactly. Yeah. I always think of it as like, like when like part of you is sort of in a bad mood, right? And the other part of you is like, hey, yeah, but what if that, yeah, but think about that. Wouldn't that be funny? And it's like, it's kind of like, if you're there with your husband or your wife, it's like, yeah, but honey, listen to this. And then they would be like, oh my God, will you just stop? And then after a while, they have to get into it, right? Because you're just so funny and you're so hilarious that you're going to rope them in. And it happens, right? It works. And so think of that within yourself too. Like very often I sit down in the morning, write in my journal or whatever. And I'm just like, ugh, I have nothing. Like that's where that orthopedist story came from. Cause I was just like, that was so crazy yesterday, And so it's like, I think you can do that to you can help yourself over those writing humps too. And storytelling humps actually is what they are. They're not really just writing, right? You're pulling stories out of yourself and you're creating stories out of nothing, which God knows if there's one thing that we need in the time of a pandemic, it's just like packaging things in a way that will bring us a little bit of joy in life.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, especially when you feel like you're posting Groundhog Day, it's like another photo of my dog, another meal, another snowshoe adventure. Whatever you're posting, it's a way to shake it up. I mean, I get people all the time like, what can I share that's like, because our lives are less, we're not going on the fun trips, we're not going to the fun conferences, we're not going to the fun parties. That was just like all free, awesome content that we don't have to even think about. Well, we gotta get a little more creative now. Like you said, roll up the sleeves, find things to share. And there's always a story. Like you said, I mean, not everyone's day in quarantine is alike. And even something so small, like seeing the spelling on a sign of a medical building spurred this entire fun adventure that you took us on. And we were like in Bridgerton with the doctor. So this is how you do it, ladies and gentlemen. So listen to Ann Handley. Definitely check out her book, Everybody Writes. Before I let you go, are you reading anything that is nonfiction, preferably like LGBTQ or female, or anything at all, that you're reading that you're like, this is a good book. This is a page turner. I'm into this right now.
Yeah. So it's funny. I was just on Clubhouse and we're doing I was doing a podcast. Oh my God. No, I was doing what do you call them on Clubhouse? A room. Yeah, I guess a room, right? Yeah. Anyway, I was doing a room. We were talking about books. So that was super fun. Yeah, I actually, as I mentioned, a book in there that I just finished. It's a book by Danielle Evans.
Okay.
Do you know her at all?
Nope.
Short story writer. She's so fantastic. I actually discovered her on Instagram of all things.
Cool.
Because she took over the Marie Claire Instagram. She did like an Ask Me Anything on there. And she's such a fantastic writer. Black, young, what a fresh voice. Like, I just love her point of view and her perspective. So her new book is called The Office of Historical Corrections. So fantastic. Yeah, wow. 10 out of 10 recommend. She's really great, especially if you love short stories, which I do. I love short stories and I love essays. And I also love anything biographical. So the other book that I'm reading is called, I'm rereading this one, actually, it's a couple years old. It's called Confessions of a Comma Queen. And it's an autobiography / just hilarious book of stories. And the reason why I like this one so much is because it's written by this woman named Mary Norris. Mary is or was a copy editor at the New Yorker magazine. She was there for 30 years. And you would think, how can that possibly be entertaining? She is such a funny writer. Like, even if you're not a writer, and even if you don't love, like, if you can't think that like you would find a comma queen confessions all that compelling, she's so fun, she's so awesome. So those are my two recommendations, both women.
And both phenomenal titles. Thank you. I mean, Office of Historical Corrections and Confessions of a Comma Queen. Like, what's in a title? A lot. That's so good. Oh, and well, thank you so much. So if the highlighters, well, when they want to stalk you, you're an Instagrammer. It's at Ann Handley, right? And then is your website annhandley.com?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then for everyone who is listening, I'm going to put in the show notes the number one thing I want you to do. The minute you finish listening to this podcast, sign up for Total Anarchy, which is Ann's fortnightly newsletter. It's positively ravishing. It's positively fortnightly love. I will say I was a British post-colonial focus for my English major, so I love all Elizabethan puns and jokes. Keep them coming. So good.
That's amazing. You know, fun fact. I actually, Bridgerton, the Netflix series. We blew through that, and so I was like, I cannot wait for the next one to come out. It was such fun like quarantine content, or I just loved it. So I listened to book two as an audiobook. So if you are into like historical romance, which I'm not, but I'm telling you, it was it was just so light and fun. And it's just like sort of a nice, like, just the world is so heavy right now. It's just kind of nice to listen to something sort of light and sort of, you know what I mean.
An escape. Yeah, it's a little bit of an escape. Yeah. We all need it. So, that's so good. Well, Ann, gosh, this has been so much fun. Thank you for sharing all of your awesome tips. That 2 sensory on that Instagram is like gold. I'm doing it like right now. And awesome. So if everyone check Ann out, give her a follow, and you rock, and get back to snowshoeing. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, see you later.